This podcast is brought to you by Shift Management's Supervisory Leadership Certificate course, where online learning and live web coaching bring out the very best in frontline and middle managers. Move from operations to management thinking and develop the skills for leadership, reaching your company goals at the same time. Check out our Supervisory Leadership Certificate course on the shiftworkplace.com website today. Hello, Culture and Leadership Podcast listeners. I'm really happy to present my guest today. Her name is Lisa Earle McLeod, and she is the author of Selling with Noble Purpose. Lisa really believed that after a long career in sales with Procter & Gamble and being VP of sales for a training and consulting firm, that there was a lot more to sales than just technique. She wanted to do something meaningful and still to be at the center of commerce. And that's why she developed Selling with Noble Purpose, drives competitive differentiation and emotional engagement. It allows people to make money and make a difference at the same time. So welcome, Lisa. Thank you so much for being a guest on the podcast.
It's such a pleasure to chat with you today.
So Lisa, that was just the formal part of the bio, but I'm wondering if perhaps you would like to add a little bit more and tell us a little bit more about you so that the listeners can get to know you better.
Yeah, so there's two elements to me that might be interesting to people. One is deep background in sales, consulting, and I've spent a lot of years helping a lot of individuals and organizations sell a lot of things, make more money, be more successful in their space. But in the last several years, what I've brought into that equation is the more personal side, which is deep desire that I have to make a difference, but also that I see in other people, that our lives are this search for meaning. Do I matter? Am I in a place that is doing something that matters? And the workplace is where those two things come together, or they can come together if we're intentional about it.
I really like the idea of having a noble purpose, because a noble purpose guides your actions through values.
It does. And most people assume that the purpose of a business is to make money, but I would challenge that. Money is the output from a successful business, but the purpose of a business, plain and simple, is to improve life for customers. And while that might not sound like a noble endeavor, to me it actually is. You know, we've worked with everything from a bank to a plumbing company to a food delivery company. And so if you think about those three examples, who wants to live their life without a bank, a plumber, or food delivery? I mean, they really do matter. And it's a question of bringing that to the fore of your own heart and mind, no matter what your role in the business, but also bringing that to the fore of the business narrative and the way the business operates.
That's a really lovely way of explaining it. If everybody sees their job as being purposeful and of serving a greater good and being of benefit to the people that they serve, then it's certainly not mundane.
That's exactly what it does. It makes meaning of the mundane. And an example I like to use, I'm a parent and my children are young adults. And for many years, I didn't talk about my children or parenting, because I felt like it kind of diminished me as this power professional if I talked about, my little children. And I realized, while that perception may have been true, that I should have been doing it earlier. So I've started now. And the example anyone who's being a parent knows, if your job as a parent, if you view that through the lens of, I've got to get them up, I've got to get them to school, I've got to get the dinner on the table, all those things matter. But if you layer on this layer of purpose and you say, I'm here to create a meaningful connection with this smaller person. I'm here to forge this person's values. I'm here to create a future leader who will stand for something in the world. When you look at those mundane tasks through that lens, you become better, you enjoy it more, and you do a better job. And the same thing is true at work.
Yeah, I really love that analogy. Every mundane task that we do, if we bring nobility to that, we empower things to happen that would not have happened otherwise.
We do, because we're thinking about something. And the way that you bring nobility to a task and this sense of meaning is actually not thinking about being the best at it. And I'm, competitive and want to be really good at things. But the way you bring the sense of meaning is always the same. It is thinking about the impact it's going to have on others.
Yeah, it's beautiful. Is that your definition of nobility?
That is. Noble is in the service of someone besides yourself, or in the service of a cause bigger than yourself.
Because if you're just restricting it to you, it doesn't go that far.
It doesn't go that far. And it's interesting because a lot of companies are really trying to drive innovation, especially right now. And one of the stories that I often tell is what a lot of people don't know is some of our greatest innovations came not because someone was sitting in a room going, I must innovate. How can I make more money? For example, Alexander Graham Bell, we have the telephone because he was playing around with tones, because he wanted to find something his wife could hear because she was deaf.
Exactly.
And it seems like a small thing, but when you apply that to a business lens, we have a lot of clients who are in the tech space, and you don't create something breakthrough sitting around the room saying, how can we be breakthrough? You create something by saying, who are our customers? What are their problems? What are their hopes and dreams? And you literally, we've gone to companies and put pictures of customers on the walls and told teams, this is Susan, this is Bill, you're designing for them. Think about them. And that's when the innovation comes.
Yeah, because it meets a need for a real person and a real group of people too.
That's right. It's a mental thing, but pretty much everything is. Our physical constructs and the way we assess and analyze business all came from mental frameworks. So if you want a different result, you got to change the framework.
Yeah, exactly. So speaking of frameworks, I'm going to ask you about your childhood. I mean, now you're looking back on your childhood as an adult, and so you're going to see things a little bit differently, but can you think of one or two incidents from your childhood that you believe made you into the person you are today?
I can. I'll cite two in particular. When I was in my first job, I was working at this place called the Doughnut King. And the Doughnut King was not a Krispy Kreme or Dunkin' Donuts chain. It was, this guy had 3 stores. He was a first generation immigrant, Vietnamese, his name was Mr. Kiln, I remember. And I was, on Saturday, after I worked there for a little while, I was entrusted with being at the Doughnut King alone, which is actually a pretty big deal. You know, I had the cash register, I was alone. And in a strip mall, you know, safe. And that tells you how much business we were doing if I was allowed to be alone. And I remember this group of firemen came in, and I was just, you know, an hourly worker. This is my very first job. I'm like 14 years old. And these group of firemen come in, and they go, how many donuts do you have on site right now? And I count them all up, and he's like, I will take them all, and I will pay you cash. And I was just like boxing up these donuts and all. And this is before cell phones because I'm old. And they've bought all these donuts, and he's taken out this roll of 20s. I don't know what they're doing, where they're going. I don't remember that. But I remember when my boss, Mr. Gill, came back and opened the cash register, and I didn't say a word. He goes, how was today? And I looked at him, I said, it was really good. He opens the cash register back before everybody used to debit and starts counting the money. And I just saw him so excited because I knew this business was a struggle. And I was like, okay, money matters. And when you make it for other people, that is a big day. And I just never forget, like, look on his face, counting out these $20 bills. And I'm just so excited. I can't stand it. And I did not know at the time, but that was my start of helping people make money.
It is. It's a beautiful story because you were excited about somebody else's good fortune.
I was so excited. And of course, I think I'm the greatest salesperson in the world. I kind of forget, years later, I'm like, the fireman just showed up and you didn't have a lot to do with it, but whatever. So that was an instrumental story in my childhood. And I'll share one other story, and I want to be really intentional and open-hearted in the way that I share this. It's a story I've been thinking a lot about lately. When I was in the 3rd grade, which was a million years ago, my mother took us to Hawaii to visit her in-laws. Let me back up. One of my mother's sisters had married a very wealthy person. And so we were a very middle-class family, but we had these wealthy relatives, and they had a house in Hawaii. And so every couple of years, we would save enough money to buy plane tickets to go to this house in Hawaii. And it was in Hana, Maui. And this is back when Hana was a really Hawaiian place, and they didn't have television in Hana. And we went during the middle of the school year, and my brother and I went to school for a month in Hana at the 3-room schoolhouse in Hana, Maui. And all the other kids were Hawaiian. My brother and I were white, like really white, like blonde hair, white, blue-eyed white. I'm in 3rd grade. My mother's arranged for us to go to the school, and we showed up, and we're the only white kids there. And the Hawaiian kids don't regularly watch, television. And there's these brown skinned kids. And I had gone to a pretty diverse elementary school, so that didn't really surprise me. But what surprised me was how curious they were about us. And they all wanted to touch our hair. And one of the little girls, when I was in the bathroom, in the girls' room, in the stall, keep in mind I'm only like 7, climbs up, leans over the stall and looks over and says, I wanted to see if we're the same. And I'm like, okay, whatever. And what I remember why that was such a gift to me in my childhood is I had the amazing experience of being the odd one out and being welcomed graciously. They were so friendly and they were so nice and they were just kids and curious. And the teachers were Hawaiian too. And I've really been thinking about it, about what it felt like to be the odd one out in a kind of weird circumstance for a little kid and be welcomed so graciously. I didn't realize that it would be something I would reflect on many times over the years.
That's a lovely story. It just speaks to how important it is for all of us to experience being in the minority. And experiencing being in the minority is not necessarily going to be a bad thing. In your case, people were curious and they welcomed and included you.
And I am super clear that that was a very different experience of being in the minority. And I am also very clear that I brought my own confidence, that I belonged places, my own experiences where I had always been welcomed in the past, that I brought that to that situation because of the benefits of, who I was raised by, where I was raised, in my whiteness. It never dawned on me that I wouldn't be welcome somewhere. So I'm very conscious of why that went the way it did because of the culture in that place and time. But I just thought if every child could experience being the odd one out in that way, what an amazing thing it would be.
It's very significant for helping people to form empathy.
Yeah. And for most people, they either don't ever have that experience, or if they do, if you're a person of color, your experience goes a completely different way. But that was pretty formative for me. And I think what it did for me over the course of my life in my own, small way, I'm always conscious if there's only one or two of something, is to walk up and welcome them very graciously. Because what's going through your mind when you're looking around is you're like, they all look different than me. Oh, they talk different than me. Oh, they do lunch differently than me. Like a lot of small things that you don't even realize are the codes of conduct. If you're the odd one out, you notice them.
You definitely do.
Mm-hmm.
When I was growing up, my mother taught in a lot of different schools, and we went to those schools either where she taught or nearby. So I changed schools 10 times in my elementary and junior high years.
Wow.
And I was always the odd person out. And so I felt very keenly what it was like not to belong. So I think that was useful in shaping my desire to reach out to other people and make those people feel welcome and included anybody who looked like they were alone, rather than joining the in-group and pretending, that those other people were not there.
Well, it gives you a portal. And that's what I look at that experience that I had. It was simply a portal, a sliver of an understanding of what it might be like in much more difficult situations. But that's why I say I want to be really careful and smart about how I talk about it. It was a peek in. It was a portal in.
Yeah, it's a portal. It's not the experience of growing up a minority and being faced with walls of hate and distrust that you have to wade through because you don't have a choice.
When you all air this, I don't know where we'll be. We won't be healthy and whole. I feel pretty confident about that. But I want to kind of take the conversation back to business a little bit. And one of the things that a lot of organizations over the last decade have reached out to our firm about is, how do I help my salespeople sell with empathy and compassion? How do I help my executives lean in with empathy and compassion? And that's not a skill that you just learn in one place and don't transfer it to the other. And so my hope is that the workplace can be a place where we practice and hone and get better at these skills, and then we carry them out into other places. In some cases, the workplace is an easier practice ground. Practice being empathetic with your colleagues, practice being empathetic with your customers is not that hard. And then get really good at it and try and practice it in some higher stakes situations.
That's great, because really, you can go home after work. You don't live with those people. You can choose not to associate with them outside of work. So the workplace is a great practice ground. That's where you can go and you can feel safe about going ahead and practicing things finding how you can be helpful, finding how you can be empathetic, finding how you can contribute to the greater good, how you can bring joy, how you can be compassionate when people are sad. All of those things can happen at work.
Well, and
Yeah.
some of, I think, what we see in the larger culture is we have trained people at work to become very transactional and only think about the bottom line, only think about what's in it for me. And I can tell you the business studies tell us that when a company behaves that way, their long-term prospects are not good. And but the other thing we all know experience is when I'm behaving that way at work, it's hard to turn it off when I go into the rest of my life. So the good news is that the loving, compassionate mode of behavior, the noble purpose path, works in your personal life and your professional life. And they're the same. And I think that one of the things when people start thinking about their lives more holistically as we are now, because everyone went home and they're working at the kitchen table and their kids are at the kitchen table, you can't divide yourself up into different personalities anymore. It's not going to work.
It didn't work before, but it was the dominant way of thinking about work. And now there is no choice.
There's no choice now. And it was the split was acutely felt by women, by people of color, by more sensitive men. You know, the split was felt by people that didn't sort of get in, that whose ethos wasn't this transactional, coarse way of living life. But what's happening now is you can't behave that way as a company or top talent won't come work for you. You know, that's one of the things that we've seen when we talk about purpose in the workplace. My generation, we want connection and meaning. We want belonging and significance. We want purpose at work. But my generation was taught to give that up in favor of money unless you want to go become a social worker. But the younger generation, they're not having it.
No, they won't put up with it.
They will not put up with it. And they are speaking the unspoken dreams of their parents.
Yeah, you really articulate that beautifully. So from the groups that you were born into, tell me a little bit about those groups, because, you know, everybody's born into a place and a time, a generation, a race, a culture, a language, a religion, something that they believe in, that their family follows, you know, social norms. Some of those groups have influenced your sense of culture and your sense of self. So what would you say from those groups that you were born into has most influenced you in the sense of who you are culturally?
So obviously being white, you walk through the world in certain ways. But I'll tell you something that I have had to counter that had a big influence on me. So I mentioned I was born pretty middle class. My parents are white, college-educated adults. My mother was a school teacher. My dad worked in banking, not like investment banker, but like branch manager. And one of the things that I didn't realize until well into adulthood, and I mean like in my 40s, was that the neighborhood culture that I lived in, there was a disdain for wealthy people. And I specifically remember there were two instances of neighbors across the street. One was a young oral surgeon, stay-at-home mom, 3 kids, and they were a younger family than ours. I used to babysit for their children. And they lived in this little split-level house across the street. And then all of a sudden, one day the for sale sign goes up, and they're moving across town to this big fancy house. And all the people in the neighborhood are kind of snippy about it. And they're like, well, you know, they just don't share our values anymore. Well, they've forgotten who they are. They're going to the other side of town. Well, we know what they are like now. And what I realized many years later was that guy paid off his student loans. They were living in that little house because he's paying off huge medical school loans. And now he's finally paid them off. And he's an oral surgeon. And I just think, isn't that interesting that we all had disdain for them instead of my parents and other parents going, before he leaves, go talk to him about what he did and how he did it, because that guy's smart. No, instead we have this disdain for them. Same thing happened with another family. Guy was an anesthesiologist working for the Army, retires from the Army, goes into private practice. So he has literally served his country as a doctor for 25 years, goes into private practice. They move to the fancy part of town. And the same thing. Well, they don't share our values anymore. And it took me years later, someone saying to me, when I was talking about how to grow my business, they said, well, if you have disdain for wealthy people, the likelihood of you becoming one of them is pretty small. And that was just like, oh, well, that was an entirely unhelpful belief system I need to get rid of.
Money's just a vehicle.
It's just a vehicle. But
And some people know how to drive it better than others.
The attachment and the idea that this nice family, that the dad has, been in the army for 20 some odd years, or the other guy has worked diligently to double down on these student loans. And the idea that somehow because they buy a nice house, they've lost all their moral values is just insane. But yet that's where we were.
Interesting. And that also relates to your business development and your sense of understanding people and their relationship to money, wouldn't you say?
Yeah. And we have a very interesting relationship with money in our society. Everybody wants it, but then we have disdain for it. And it's reflected in the profession that I work in, which is sales, because people have disdain for sales. Yet it's hard to imagine a business operating without someone selling things. So the very thing that is crucial for any business to be able to sell things is the thing that we look with disdain upon the people who do it. I always say it's one of the few professions where we let the people who do it badly define it.
Ah, yes. But wouldn't you say that that's true of a lot of things, really, that we disdain groups of people that are in service to us because they're in service to us, yet we would not be able to exist without them. Right. There's disdain for nurses, there's disdain for teachers and social workers because they're in the service profession. What would our lives be like without them? It would be horrific. It would
be. I think there's some disdain for those, but I think sales has got a unique spot on the rankings of professions. The only group that rated lower than salespeople were politicians.
Well, thanks for setting me straight on those stats.
There's disdain for other professions, but sales is right at the bottom.
So, in terms of disdain, what about motherhood? Where would you say that is?
Oh, I think motherhood, we have a double-edged situation. I think everyone reveres motherhood, but no one wants to provide the resources to do it. You won't find anyone to show disdain for motherhood. But yet, when you look at how our society is organized, the people who are able to mother well are people with good resources.
I'm seeing you're pretty visionary and that you can join different polarities and help to forge a new reality from putting those things together. That must be one of the essential parts of your book, which I haven't read yet, but I intend to read it. It sounds like exactly what I should be reading right now.
Yeah, that book, Selling with Noble Purpose, is about how to bring together the money and the meaning. I'll tell you, I wrote a book about 10 years ago called The Triangle of Truth. And it was about exactly that, how to bring together polarities. And I wrote it because 10 years ago, I thought we were politically polarized. Ha ha! Little did I know things were going to go from bad to worse. Mm-hmm. And the thing that I saw at that time that I'm seeing today is that people were making assumptions about other people's intent. And so what happened 10 years ago, one side of the political spectrum assumes the other side of the political spectrum has bad intent. And so then they're unwilling to hear. And now we get to the point where the thing that I didn't really see as clearly then that I do now is we actually do have some people with bad intent. I don't think it's the majority of our population. When we make assumptions about bad intent, it rises. Whatever you pay attention to rises. And so I think the bad intent has risen and it's become impossible to have a conversation.
I'm not sure if intent is the judgment of bad intent. It's more like judgment of character. So we'll look at ourselves and we'll say, oh, we are victims of circumstance. And then we look at the other people and we go, what's the matter with those people? They're morally corrupt. So we assume bad character on the part of people that are not like us. And we assume that we maintain our good character and yet just circumstances might cause us to make a misstep here and there. But if we switched that around and we went, all of those missteps that I made, those are character things I need to autocorrect. I need to start thinking about what's a better way of living. And those other people, there must have been something that got in the way. I wonder what that obstacle is. Let's figure it out.
I think in everyday life that is an approach that really makes sense. I will tell you what I underestimated 8 or 9 years ago was the power of people who I believe do have bad intent. I underestimated the desire for just pure power for power's sake. I underestimated the racism and sexism that was present. I knew it was there. I didn't know it was there as big in numbers or as vitriolic as it was.
Well, it's
And
become
so,
pretty obvious right now how deep it is and how bad it is.
when you talk about bringing polarities together, one of the things, and I'll use some lower stakes examples, if you think about someone who has a different perspective than you on something simple, how to raise your children. If you're with a partner and you both have a different take on how to raise your children, it's really easy to make assumptions. But when you lean into and start asking questions like, if they say, well, the best way to do it is just be strict, make them toe the line, and you're thinking, oh, the best way to do it is lean into understanding. That's a good example. When you get past their solution and get to what they hope to accomplish and say, what do you hope will happen if we do that? And then what would happen? And then what would happen from there? And usually, like an example of, and it often happens in parenting where you've got a more strict parent and a less strict parent, is the more strict one will say, I want them to be able to navigate the world in a way that gets them respected, or I want them to achieve these things. But you've got to get behind their presenting solution, decouple that from their intent, and see their bigger intent. And the one who does that, who can lean into that and say, what's your intent? And you got to ladder it up a couple times and get the other person to say that. Then you say, I'm so glad we agree on this.
Mm-hmm.
That is exactly what I want to. And you will watch it. The other person's defenses go down. But then just as you've decoupled their solution from their intent, you have to do the same for yourself. And one of the reasons why we get so polarized, taking politics off the table and the power and the racism and all that, just going back into our lives around two parents or finance versus HR. The reason we get so polarized is because we're unwilling to let go of our solution and step into a place of uncertainty. Because it's that place of uncertainty that the innovation is born.
Mm-hmm. You create a third space when everybody's willing to step back from that and say, how can we move together?
What's possible? And it's very different from a negotiated space.
Mm-hmm.
Because a negotiated space is, I want to pay $4,000, you want to charge me $5,000, and then we go back and forth. And maybe if I'm really aggressive or manipulative, we get closer to my number. Maybe if you are, if I need it badly, we get closer to your number. That's not stepping into a different space.
No, not at all. That just creates more polarities.
Yeah. And that's when, okay, tell you what, they'll stick to your schedule Monday through Friday. We'll be on my touchy-feely thing on the weekend. You still haven't actually created a framework.
No, you haven't developed a shared understanding.
That's right. And then when we work with companies, one example that we often use is Disney. And Disney has 4 key pillars. And 2 pillars seem in conflict with each other. One pillar is safety and one pillar is show. And the example we often use is that if the show people had their way, and the show is all about magic, if the show people had their way, when Tinkerbell comes out at the end of the night at a Disney park, she would be, jetting around the park with an invisible jetpack. She would be waving a real wand. And if the show had real fire on, and if the safety people had their way, she'd be standing on the ground in tennis shoes with a flashlight. These 2 seemingly conflicting values come together because the show people are not going to compromise on show. It's going to be amazing. And the safety people are not going to compromise on safety. Instead, they say, okay, how can we make this happen? Because their end game is not safety. Their end game is not show. Their end game is magic for the guest.
That's why we need to remove all tentacles to polarizations. It's about us and them working together towards something we both have never experienced before. The magic, right?
The magic. And so they come into those meetings and the safety people aren't armored up. We're going to hold fast on safety. And the show people aren't. We're going to beat those safety people down and get what we want.
There won't be any safety or any show. There'll be just nothing.
Right. Or worse, one side will win and Tinkerbell will be standing on the ground and no one will think it's fantastic, or she'll fly through the air and fall down in front of the castle and break her arm in front of a 5-year-old. It is going to be terrible.
Both bad outcomes.
Both bad outcomes.
This is great. So Lisa, I heard your LinkedIn Live about that using the Tinkerbell example, and I just loved it. So from the groups that you chose to belong to, because you grew into groups and you looked at them differently as an adult and said, this is it. But you also chose to belong to sales. You chose to belong to a number of other, I don't know what your hobbies are or what your affiliations are. Is there something that you've adopted into your leadership style that you took from somebody else's culture because you learned to work together with them, just like the safety people and the show people in Disneyland with Tinkerbell?
Yeah, there is a group that I really learned something from. So I grew up, my mother's a school teacher. I'm the daughter of a scientist. And my mother, the scientist, was very factual and practical about things. She was an atheist, not an agnostic, an atheist. And, I didn't question it. I'm a kid. And one of the things, though, that I always felt a pull to was the spiritual world. And I couldn't quite explain it, but I felt like there's something happening here that's bigger than us. And I'm not going to try and explain it now because it's too big to explain. But one thing I did see was that in almost every faith tradition, there is a grounding of principles about how to behave. And they're all very similar if you look across different faiths. And they tell people how to behave in small circumstances and in large circumstances because they are circumstance agnostic. And one of the groups that I joined was a faith called Unitarian Universalism. And one of the core principles was believe in the inherent worth and dignity of every person. And it really struck me. And I took it and said, I'm in, this transcends circumstance. This transcends, whether I'm at home or at work with a 2-year-old or a 22-year-old or a 52-year-old, believe. And the word believe is pretty important. Not just accept, but believe in the inherent worth and dignity. And it's inherent because you don't have to do anything to merit it. And it's, the other words, the inherent worth and dignity, that you have value without even doing anything. And I need to believe in your dignity. And so that was something that I got from another group. It has really served me well in my life.
It's pretty much foundational, woven through everything else that you do.
Yeah. And what's interesting is that principle is not unique to that faith. Those words happen to land on me very well, but it is in every single faith. So this is not new information here. This is timeless wisdom.
It's just that humanity hasn't learned it yet, which is why we need to keep having more teachers coming to remind humanity that this is there. And if we want to make progress, we're going to have to start seeing each person as having inherent worth and dignity, because we all do. It's just that we don't always see it.
It's a learned thing. I don't believe people are evil, but I don't know that that's so much in our nature, because if you look as a mother, when you have a baby or a toddler, their instinct is towards self.
It is, and it isn't. You see them doing very altruistic things and also things that are very selfish. What you said earlier, what you pay attention to grows. And if we keep paying attention to the selfish, aggressive side and say that's all there is, then we never see the other parts.
We'll never see the other side. And that's your job as a leader, whether you are leading your family, leading a group of people. And it often is, you'll hear people in the workplace say, we need to treat our people like adults. And what they mean is we need to afford them inherent worth and dignity to make their own decisions. And actually, we need to treat children that way too. But the idea of, if you are a leader, one of the things that you can do for your people, it doesn't mean you're better than them or anything like that, but one of the things that you can do is you can act as a constant moral center for them. And it doesn't mean being preachy or anything like that, but we all need help in being pointed the right direction.
Exactly. And that leader in a leadership position should have a moral compass. And if it doesn't, and it goes to the other side, we end up having movements of hatred and killing and destruction.
And one of the things that you will see is, what I'm seeing in this post-COVID world, is motive is being laid bare. And we
Mhm.
see the organizations that had clarity of purpose, that their purpose was to serve their customers and take care of their people. They jumped into action. They knew what to do. And organizations who were very transactional organizations whose purpose was simply to make money, and they'd cloaked it in a couple of nice values, but that was their true end game, was only the money. Those organizations are really struggling
Yes.
because people can see it very, very clear. We had one leader of a very large organization say about their global sales team, they said, we want to make sure our people are seen as helpful, not scavengers.
Yeah, that's lovely.
Yeah, and we got to make sure that's out there.
I spoke with a company a number of years ago. It was in a recession, and the CEO said to me, our sales hid a multitude of sins. And when we didn't have the sales left, there was nothing left that I could believe in or that we could stand for. And it just hit me. I've never forgotten what he said. And I don't know if they did anything about it, but it just was interesting how he realized that. And
Yeah,
if organizations would realize it sooner, then they wouldn't be blindsided by things that stop the one transaction that they're doing. They would have a framework that was larger, more integrated, and that could foresee some of the things that were coming. And you can't foresee everything, but you have at least a framework that you can depend on in crisis.
that's right. Something to tether yourself to. And that's what one of our CEOs said, is he said, I'm so glad we did that work clarifying our noble purpose and how we serve customers, because if our whole ethos was just rising and falling with our own financials, we'd have nothing to tether ourselves to. But
Mm-hmm.
now we're here to make life better for customers. We can double down on that.
Right.
That points us in the right direction. And those are the firms. We saw it happen in the 08-09 recession. We're going to see it happen again now. The firms who have a purpose bigger than money outperform the market by over 350%. And it's because when times are tough, they double down on improving life for customers. And as the economy starts to regain, those are the companies that people turn to.
Mm-hmm. And that muscle of understanding and being interested in the customer experience doesn't just develop because you have a crisis. You have to have worked that muscle so that you've got some capacity. So, yeah. I wanted to ask you about your temperament, being what you're born with and what people would call is your nature. And then your personality is, how you've overcome obstacles and benefited from whatever opportunities came your way. So what would people say? That's just so Lisa, because she's always been like that since she was a child.
Hmm. I am an extrovert, I'm a talker, I'm a storyteller, and I'm a figure or outer of things. I always want to see the deeper meaning and connect the dots.
Mm-hmm. And what has been added on as a result of your life experience that's become part of your personality?
I've learned to become a much better listener, and I've learned to be more concise with my language. And I would say I've also learned to be more open hearted.
Lovely. So can you recall a time when you became aware that, and probably you've already talked about this about your childhood in Hawaii, but you became aware of the fact that what you considered to be normal was actually cultural and specific to your culture?
Yes, when I went to a dinner at someone else's house and they didn't speak. And dinners at my house were, not only did we all speak, we're a family of over talkers, and you all interrupted each other all the time to get center stage. And I went to dinner at someone else's house and they didn't speak, and I didn't like that at all. And a couple years later, I went to dinner at someone else's house where they had really great conversation and the parents facilitated asking the kids questions and listened to the answers. And I thought, that seems better than my house.
So you took both of those and you looked at the new experience and you went, this is a new ideal I could strive for.
Yeah, I like that one.
So we're reaching the end of the interview and a couple more questions. One, I'm just wondering, people hire you now. So what do you tell them about when you're setting the expectations about what's the best way to work with you?
So the best way to work with us, our best clients are people who call us because they have something valuable they're providing their clients, and they want to do three things. They want to differentiate and stand out in the market. They want their team to be laser-like focused on customers. And then the third thing is they want to build a tribe of what we call true believers. which are those people who are so emotionally engaged and so excited about their job that they think about it and talk about it with pride. And those are the people who call us, and that's what we help them do.
You help them do that, but how do they need to work with you to make that happen?
Usually our engagements include some assessment of where they are, some consulting around what their purpose and message should be, and then some behavioral work at the executive level and at the frontline sales customer service level.
Mm-hmm.
Usually takes about 6 to 9 months. And we've had a number of clients, in fact, win awards as best place to work. A couple clients have doubled their revenue. They have their pick of top talent. They've won industry awards. And usually our work takes about 6 or 9 months. After about 12 or 18 months is when those things start.
You truly are helping people to realize their noble purpose.
That's the aim. It's taken us 10 years to figure out how to do it, but we've got it down now.
I'm happy for you. I think it's wonderful. Everyone needs to work with you, I think. Which brings me to the last question, which is, what would you like to promote? What would you like to share with the audience?
Just Google Noble Purpose. Go to our website, download the white paper, and start using it.
Easy. We can do that. That's perfect. Lisa, I really would like to thank you for the gift of time and insight, and also the vision and the perseverance that you showed in putting this beautiful initiative together that is helping so many people to reach their true potential and achieve a really noble purpose in life.
Thanks. Those are heartfelt words, and I do take them to heart. So thank you so much.
And have a wonderful day.
You too.
Lisa McLeod comes from a background of sales excellence. She went from a sales director at Procter & Gamble to the VP of sales for a training and consulting firm, and then became a business owner and author. Wanting to show how sales as meaningful dialogue and results that help the client have a better life and live in a better world, Lisa has demonstrated over and over with her customers that noble purpose consistently outperforms sales as a transactional technique. Over the years, Lisa perfected her selling with purpose and methodology and put it into a book by the same name. That book is one of a suite of 5 must-read business books Lisa has written to great acclaim. She's been featured on Forbes, Fortune, and the New York Times. I really enjoyed Lisa's concise, no-nonsense responses to my questions, and her vision of a humanity that knows how to interact with others using deep respect for their inherent dignity. She brings out the best in people and organizations, and I'm honored that Lisa would spend the time to contribute to the Culture and Leadership Connections podcast. You can find her books on Amazon and links to her contact information in our podcast show notes. Thank you for joining us, and may insights about culture and leadership connections continue to inform and guide your day. This podcast would not be possible without the expertise of our Culture and Leadership Connections production team. A big thank you and shout out to Mike Kurlander for audio production and editing, to Malvika Kathpal for the show notes, Bernadette Guadiz for online web and social media management and promotions, Celine Bayogo for design, and Kirsten Hoyer for website and branding. Thank you so much. Hey, Culture and Leadership Connections podcast listeners. Do you love these insightful and moving interviews published twice monthly for your listening pleasure? You may not know that it costs between $300 and $500 per month to pay for our podcast episodes. Shocking, but true. Well, now you can help support this podcast by showing your love with a little skin in the game real money on the Patreon website. For as little as $5 or as much as $50 a month, you can contribute to keep Culture and Leadership Connections alive and healthy. Your donation is invaluable in helping us connect the hearts and minds of people across cultures and professions for happier and more humane workplaces. I know you will call on your inner generosity, knowing that your contribution is a practical demonstration of love and support. Check out the patreon.com/culture and leadership connections page to see what subscription level feels right for you, and find out about the special loyalty perks at each patron level. That's spelled Patreon, patreon.com/culture and leadership connections. Thank you for your generosity.